Hey guys, so today I thought it would be fun to talk about some things that we don't always talk about, but being consistent as a bass player in a lot of different places, a lot of different ways is very important if you want to be a professional or if you want to play music with other people and just a whole bunch of things like this. So what do I mean by consistency? I mean the ability to play the same thing in a row for 5 minutes at a time if you need to on certain songs. And then also being able to have consistent technique so that your attack, your sound is just very even. So that's another important thing. Some other things, just consistent practice so that we're constantly getting better. That one's really important. And there's some tricks to that as well. And then just consistency in general. So I think consistent practice is a big one, and consistently being able to play the same thing over and over is something that a lot of people take for granted. So a lot of times, for instance, I'm going to start with that one. When we play through things, when we're learning songs, we generally think like, oh, okay, I can play this groove, so I'm done. I can move on to the next song, rather than learning the entire song all the way through. So what I would argue is really important to just go ahead and play songs all the way through and really gauge if you're playing the song consistently. So like if we take something like Billie Jean, for example, where we're repeating the line a whole bunch. First, you can play the simpler version without the extra octave. So the thing to look for here is your volume consistent? Is one finger louder than the other when you're playing these notes? Is your tone consistent? And then is your speed consistent? So are you staying at a pretty solid tempo and very, very steady? Or are you kind of all over the place? Those are kind of good things to ask yourself. So the reason I'm picking this one is it's also an endurance thing. When you play songs like Billie Jean all the way through, you're like, oh, the bass line's pretty easy. Once I get past the initial finger twister kind of thing, it's pretty straightforward and there's nothing weird about it. And, then you get a break from it when you get to the chorus. But there's a lot of times where you're playing that repetitive pattern over and over again. Like I said, this is the simpler version. You could do it with the octaves, which is even harder to be consistent on. So for me, when I play that song live, I started out with the octaves and then kind of abandoned them as soon as the singing starts, so that it really has that oomph right at the beginning. But then as the rest of the band is there, I don't think it's quite as necessary all the way through live. And it's just not worth kind of the pain that it puts on your hand. However, if I were doing a much bigger gig where it was super important to have that low in there, I would also, put up with the pain in my wrist and play all the way through and do that. And so how do you work up to where you can have endurance through an entire song on something repetitive like that? Well, you want to make sure that you're practicing with really good technique. First of all, you want to make sure that you do warm-up exercises and things. So all of this like consistency and endurance I'm talking about, it really all relates to how you're practicing. And that's kind of the main thing. So if you're practicing for a few minutes a day, then that's awesome. At least you're practicing every day. If you're practicing an hour every week just on one day and not playing any of the other days, it's going to be hard to improve and it's going to be hard to build this consistency. Because while you might be learning new songs and might be playing different things, you're not really getting a lot of practice on the repetition. So, with something like Billie Jean, let's just take that for example. Your goal at first is to be able to play it one time, and once you can play that one time, you're you're like, cool, that's great. But then if you try playing it 4 times in a row after that, you really got to gauge things like, do I have a tendency to speed up on the 3rd or 4th time? So these are situations where you want to use a metronome just to check your timing. And I'm not going to pretend to be the most consistent player in the world. And I also think that U-bass is a little bit harder to be consistent on. So it's just something we've got to talk about because of string noise and things of that nature. It's just a little bit trickier. So I'm hoping everything is working. I'm going to check the chat in a minute on here. Right now, it's once again doing that thing where it's not exactly working on here. Oh, there we go. I pulled out a second window and it started working. Okay, so that's all I had to do. Okay, so Seth says consistency is important no matter what kind of bass you're playing, and I totally agree. And compression pedals help with consistency, at least sound-wise as well. So yes, so then there's consistency of gear. That is another point. You can do that. I don't use compressor pedals as much, and I think being consistent on your playing is really important at first. So anyway, what I would do first of all is have a consistent practice schedule, right? So and I'm bad about this. I'm going to be honest. Lately, I haven't had that, but if you at least want to be playing something every day, and I think I at least do that. I don't always play specific things, but I usually play every day. I might miss a day or 2 a week on average these days, but usually I'm playing pretty much every day. So a lot of times the reason that I don't have a practice routine completely set is because I'm playing a lot of gigs, and playing a lot of shows builds consistency, because you kind of have to be consistent doing that. You really want to build up the consistency before playing the show, but I digress. So with Billie Jean, back to that example, first we've got the groove down, right? And so we got to be able to play it like once or twice. So then we pick a tempo to play it at. We got to get up to full speed, right? So we may want to start under full speed at first. And I don't even remember what full speed is. But we're going to start at 100. So let's say you can play it at 100. First, your goal is to play it one time very consistently, where the volume is pretty even, unless you're supposed to accent certain notes. And then the idea is we're going to try to play it 4 times in a row. 2, 3, 4. And so the things to look for in consistency is your left hand doing the same thing over and over again. That's good. Is your right hand doing the same thing over and over again? So for me, it doesn't always, to be honest. We'll see. So you want to have your right hand very consistent. So what I would say is on this particular pattern, you could either start with your middle finger is one way to make it really consistent. Or you can start with your pointer finger and alternate the whole time. That's probably the most consistent thing you can do, is just alternate one way or the other, whether you start with your middle finger or your pointer finger. But you could also, in certain cases, I wouldn't do this with this song because I think it's a good way to make your right hand lock up. But you can play things with one finger to get a really consistent attack too. But I think doing this for like 4 minutes straight, where most of it is playing that, would probably wear out your finger, especially if you had multiple songs like this in a row. So I don't recommend that as much. All right. So Seth says metronomes or a drum or backing track work for you. Good. That's awesome. Yeah. So backing tracks are more fun. I'm gonna get into that a little bit soon. But yes, backing tracks are great. Metronome's great. I think sometimes it's good to play with it completely stripped down so you can really focus on your playing. One other thing you can do while you're playing these things is record it and hear how it sounds when you play it back. And it's difficult to be completely consistent with the tone. So you don't want to like absolutely, nitpick yourself to death about little things happening, like string noise is really hard to get rid of. So at first, you really just want to focus on getting the timing consistent. So just focus on one aspect of it, get it consistent. And then you want to be able to play 4 times in a row, and then we want to move it up to 8 times in a row. So that's kind of like a good goal. So we're at 100 beats per minute. Let's make our goal 8 times in a row now. 2, 3, 4. Six, 7, and 8. So one thing I noticed while I was playing was my fingernail hit the string one time and caused one of the notes to be a lot louder than the other one. So there's little things like that. But this time I was focusing on timing, and I felt like the timing was pretty consistent. But there is a little bit of a push and pull sometimes. Sometimes when you're playing along with the metronome, you really want to listen to make sure you're right with the beat. But you also, in between the beats, don't want to be speeding up and slowing down. And I noticed, at least on the first couple of those, that I had a tendency of, like, before falling right into the pocket, I was kind of playing a little too fast and then had to like adjust. So we want to be able to adjust, but to be really consistent, we want to be able to not have to adjust, which we can't always do. But the more you play, the more you practice, the more consistent you become at playing. So I do think it's important to play through things until you can groove on them solidly. And I would say if it's a repetitive groove like that, the next step after being able to play it something like 8 times in a row is to, instead of measuring the amount of times you play it, measure the amount of time that goes by. So measure, can I do a minute of this straight and have a pretty consistent tone? And at this point, I would say record yourself. Because while you're playing, you're going to be focusing on a lot of things. You might not hear certain inconsistencies. And at that point, you can kind of go in and listen back to what you're doing and be like, ooh, I kind of muted some notes there. Oh, there was some fret buzz there. And then when you notice things like that, you got to ask yourself a few questions as you go back. Is it something that you can fix? So if you're going back and you're playing and you're like, oh, there was some fret buzz, one thing you can look at is your left hand and be like, am I playing too far back on the fret? Do I need to be like within the square closer to the body of the bass so I don't have to push down quite as hard? So that's one thing that it could be. If you're getting a lot of buzz, it could be that you're playing too far back, and so you're having to push down a lot harder, and that's making kind of an inconsistency there. So then you can kind of play a little bit further up where you're closer to the fret. And then you just got to be consistently behind the fret so that you're not accidentally in front of it and slightly muting the string. So that's kind of the next step. We've got our right hand consistency. We've got our left hand consistency. We've got our timing being consistent. And then we record ourselves to play back to see if our volume between notes is consistent as well. And really, you can check all these things on a recording and playback. But I do think it's good to practice playing a minute of a groove and then work your way up to, like, if it's a song where the groove plays the entire song. I'm trying to think of a song like that. Pumped Up Kicks is pretty close, but it does stop here and there. There are parts where it pauses. Trying to think of some other ones that are really good for practicing this kind of stuff. Oh, I was talking to a student earlier today, and it was Sugar Pie Honey Bunch. It's a very repetitive, like Motown kind of. You get the idea. So then it's like you have this consistency going on throughout the whole groove, but you get to a certain point of it, and then that's the other thing. It might change. So you might get so ingrained into playing one pattern that when a song has a part where it changes at the end, that you have to practice that part a lot and then practice the transition of playing a few of the groove in a row into that new part so that you don't just continue playing the groove or your fingers don't get tripped up switching spots like that. So that's kind of something as well. All right, let's see if anybody else has said anything. So Seth says consistency is cool, so you don't have to post edit as much. Right. So I really feel that one. I have to do some post edits in my videos. I'm just going to be transparent with you guys. And one thing that would help me not have to is if I were doing less than one a week, I could practice each song longer and get to the point where I'm consistent on them. So some of these harder arrangements, some of the ones that I post, really might take you a few weeks, might take you a few months to get really consistent on. And there's no shame in that. So that's another thing. In order to get consistent on stuff, you have to take your ego out of it. So you might be playing something and be like, why am I not consistent on this yet? I've been playing for however long. I've been doing this for, a while, this, that, and the other, that kind of thing. And really, you just want to set the ego aside, because that's the part saying I should be able to do this, and just kind of accept the fact that, okay, I'm having trouble playing this one consistently, right? So then in that case, instead of 100 beats per minute or whatever we were starting at, you're going to want to slow the tempo down so that you can focus on the different aspects of things and see which part of it is inconsistent. Because a lot of times when we're playing things, it's the right hand. And I've noticed this about a lot of stuff that I've played, where I'll play with the metronome and I'll work consistently up to speed on something, and then I'll hit a brick wall on it. And that brick wall is because my right hand fingers were tripping over themselves, and at the slower speed, I could recover from it. And I was not thinking about it consciously. My fingers were just doing whatever they were doing. And so I had to go back in, slow it down, and organize what my fingers were doing to be able to play it consistently. And so that's just another idea on doing these warm-up exercises. I think the 1, 2, 3, 4, and you're alternating the fingers on this hand while you're doing index, middle, ring, pinky on the left hand. I think that one's a really great one to build consistency, because you're getting every finger to have a good tone on the frets. You're trying to keep an even speed as you're going. So if you aren't familiar with that exercise, it's just a very classic exercise. I have a video on it on my beginner playlist. So if you go to my channel and search under playlists for the beginner playlist, there's a video on that, and it's also included in the ultimate beginner thing. But those kinds of warm-up exercises really help you build consistency, because you're getting consistent use of all the fingers. Your goal is to get every single note to come out clearly. So you're having to think about things like, where within the fret am I playing to get, the smoothest tone, to get the clearest sound. And then you have time to think about, is my index finger and my middle finger matching in volume, or is one louder than the other? And then there are some songs where you want one to be louder than the other, and the consistency is keeping them at consistent volumes, whether you're accenting one or not. It's like if you're doing a walking line, you may want to be accenting beats 2 and 4, and so you may want to have one of those fingers hit slightly harder to be your accent, is one option. There's other ways to do it, but that's an option. All right. So let's see. So I'm glad to see that Seth's in here. So Seth pointed out some other things. He was saying playing to a metronome or a backing track. So I think once you get to a certain point with the metronome or with a drum track, then you can take it to a backing track. And there's so many backing tracks on YouTube. There's probably a bunch of services that you can pay for backing tracks. Like you could probably find certain karaoke sites where you can take out different instruments and do that. Whoops, didn't mean to hit the metronome. But some of the things I like is searching for bassless backing tracks. So especially for jazz, you can find a lot of jazz standards with bassless backing tracks. And that's another thing. I think a lot of times when we play through a song, a jazz song, we typically like to play through the form. And I almost feel like once we've played a walking line through the form a couple times, we're like, I've got it, I'm good. But a real good way to build up consistency on walking is to find a backing track that's like 3 to 5 minutes long and play the entire song to the backing track. So you're playing a bass line the entire way through that backing track. And what that's going to do is, 1, get you comfortable with the song and the changes a lot quicker. And 2, you can focus on consistency of sound, and you're also focusing on endurance. So you have to be consistent when you're playing for a long time, and not wear out. So obviously endurance is a part of playing consistent, because let's say you just got through playing a walking a walking line that's kind of medium speed, and that wore you out. And then the next song is a burning fast, like 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, you know, kind of. You know, it's like that tempo. Well, then you want to kind of work up to being able to do a fast song after you're already kind of halfway into the set or whatnot. So just another idea on consistency that is good. So then we've got practicing consistency, technique consistency, where you just look at each individual hand to figure out what's going on, the coordination aspect of it. And then, of course, doing warm-ups really helps a lot with this. Like I said, running scales is another thing. So instead of just doing the 1, 2, 3, 4 thing, we also want to run our scales. So if you're wondering why musicians do these repetitive things, it's like, well, I don't get it. Why would you run scales a whole bunch if you can already play them? Well, we're warming up so that when we're performing, you know, we're ready to go. There's nothing that's going to like throw us off a little bit. Sometimes the reason we warm up is to, like, you know, if you have like stiff joints or something, sometimes playing through those things will kind of ease them into playing. And then when you're ready to play an actual song, you have control over what your hands are doing instead of a finger needing to pop or whatever at a really inconvenient time. So warming up and then having a practice routine, I think, is really good. So as far as a consistent practice schedule, what's kind of a good thing to do? I think practicing every day for 15 to 20 minutes is great. If you can do more than that and you have the day to set it aside, then do. I think an hour would be optimal. But if you only have 20 to 30 minutes, what I would do is consistently do warm-ups at the beginning. I think we can make a drinking game out of the word consistently or consistency while I'm playing through here, because I'm going to say it about 150 times or something by the end of the video, maybe more. So don't do that, honestly. But anyway, in order to, I totally lost my train of thought. Speaking of consistency. But I would set aside the first 5 minutes of practice and play through some warm-up kinds of things. So for a week or two, that might be just doing this as your warm-up. And I wouldn't worry about doing it fast. I'd just do like a medium speed and go for clean tone, clean notes, you know, no fret buzz, none of that kind of thing. So that is what I would shoot for. And I wanted to double check because I noticed that Seth is the only person that I've seen in the chat. So I'm not sure if that's working, but if anybody else is there, or Seth, if you're still there as well, just go ahead and drop another line in the chat. I'm curious to see if it's working or if it froze up. And let me know how the video quality is as well. I'm wondering if it's better doing it this way or if it's better checking it on the phone. All right, well, let me know, guys, and I will get back to you here in a second. But yes, so warm-ups like this, then warming up with scales is good. Some other good warm-ups. There was one that came up in a lesson today that was, it's something that Jaco Pastorius did, where you would go up a major arpeggio, then shift up, and then come down a minor. And sorry, these are 7th chord arpeggios. So you go up C major 7, root 3rd, 5th, 7th, and then when you got to the D minor chords, we're going like up a scale, basically C, D, E, F, G, A, B. So we're doing a what the 7th chords would be if you were in the key of C major. That's confusing. So anyway, you're doing like the root, the 3rd, the 5th, and the 7th. Then you're going up to the 7th of the next chord, the 5th, the 3rd, and the root. So I'm just going to go through. If that doesn't make any sense, then that's okay. I know it's kind of like a theory nut kind of thing. So I'm just going to walk through what the frets are in that. But I think being able to consistently do arpeggios is really important as well. Not just scales, not just 4 notes in a row on each string, but also some things that'll actually be used in the music like that. So let me chat and see if that's working better. Okay, so far I haven't seen anybody else chat. So once again, I just want to check the chat. So if anybody's out there and watching, just type something into the chat If I don't hear anything from you guys, I'll know that it in 2 minutes or something, then I'll know that it's broken. But let me know if you can in there, and if not, we'll just keep going. But yes, scales, arpeggios, those things all help you on your consistency too, so that when you're learning new songs, you can have these patterns be familiar under your fingers. Another thing is consistency on reading rhythms, and hearing rhythms. So listening to things and trying to reproduce them really quickly is a good skill. So, like, let's say and reproducing rhythms. Sorry. So, like a good example, earlier today, I was talking to another student about a Tom Petty song, "Girl," and we were simplifying it down. But the main thing that needed to be consistent in the song, the simplified version of the groove, was getting these bum 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 at the beginning of each measure. It really didn't matter what you do on the end of the measure, because the bass player was really doing fills there, but the most important thing was having 1E and a 2E and a in the beginning of these, as 1E and a 2E and at the beginning of each measure. And then doing that on each chord. So kind of just being able to hear rhythms, being able to hear what the groove really needs to consist of, and getting that part really solid. And then if you want to add fills in between, it's okay. But once again, with consistency, you got to know which notes are absolutely essential to the piece, even when you're adding fills. And then if you want the fills to work out, once again, those fills that I'm doing are coming from scale patterns. So if I practice my scales a whole bunch, my fingers just kind of know which notes to walk up. So I know which notes to play and which notes not to play based on what key we're in, which comes from that consistency of practicing scales as well. All right, so that's a lot of stuff. I'm just gonna go over some like generic little things as well, and I'm gonna check the chat one more time. So far, it's only Seth, but he is commenting a lot, and I'm getting those. So if anybody else is there, just let me know that the chat's working for you guys too. And Seth, if you notice that other people have commented and I can't see theirs, just let me know that they commented as well. Yeah, I appreciate it. Okay, so almost the fun exercise on the upright bass. Yeah, so there's a lot of things on upright. It's a little trickier, and developing consistency takes more time, I would say, on upright bass than anything else, just because you have to build up the strength to be able to do it, as well as the endurance. All right, so good. Okay, the chat's working just fine then. So thank you for confirming that. So yeah, so we've got the consistency of rhythm, consistency of left hand and right hand technique, the consistency of practicing each week and being able to basically just play things without fret buzz if your instrument is, good and intact. That's another thing. Okay, consistency of gear. So this one's a big one that catches a lot of professional musicians and semi-professional musicians, that are playing shows off guard. So if you're in this category, always being prepared, having extra stuff. So once again, this is something that I could work on better, but having sometimes having a backup amp even with you is important for gigs. Having a backup bass. So this is an interesting one that somebody was telling me, is that they had an upright bass gig and they were playing upright and something happened to the upright. I can't remember if they dropped it or just something awful happened to the upright. The bridge might have blown up, whatever it was, they couldn't play it after whatever happened. And I've talked to some other people and they say they keep an electric bass in the car in case of things like that. So the gig doesn't have to stop or be bassless for the time just because you had a mishap with your instrument. So I think basses are great for that. If you play upright bass, you may just want to have a U bass that you just keep in the trunk. I mean, when you're playing a gig, not like all day or anything when it's hot outside, but you may just want to have a U bass just there ready to go at your gigs, so that if something happens with either your electric bass or your upright bass, you have something that you can play for the rest of the show. other things that happens, you might, you don't think about it a lot, but occasionally people break bass strings, right? It's not a very common thing, but on U-bass, it's a little more common because the polyurethane can kind of wear out stuff, or the nylon core on these can break easier than a metal core. But yeah, so you want to have extra strings with you. You want to have an extra battery if your pickup runs on batteries. So all the U-basses, you want to have some extra watch batteries. What are these, CR? I can't remember. I've got some dead ones over here, ironically. CR 2032. So, you want to have some extra, those little batteries if they run on that, or extra 9-volt batteries if you're playing an active electric bass, or if you're playing one of the Muso brand that runs on a 9-volt as well. I think I already said strings. It's nice to even have a backup amp option, right? Because sometimes amps mess up. So sometimes I could be playing through the PA. So maybe just having a direct box with you so that you can plug into a PA system, or you could just bring an amp with you. And then a big one is instrument cables. So instrument cables, you want to wrap them consistently. I don't know if you all are familiar with this, and this might be kind of an annoying side, but let me turn this off for a second. I'm laughing because this is kind of ridiculous to talk about. But if you're a professional, if you wrap your cables consistently, I do this technique that's called over and under. And if you do it that way, they don't get twisted. And when you throw it out, they throw out straight. And it's really easy to do. And that's another important kind of thing, is just making sure you're taking care of your equipment consistently, so that when you get to a gig and you've done all this practice and all this endurance stuff, and you know that you can play a 4-hour gig and be fine afterwards and everything, and then all of a sudden your gear messes up on you, then that's not good. It's a good way to not get hired again, right? Because he wasn't prepared for the gig. Let's call somebody else that has gear that works. So that can happen. And then the obvious consistent stuff. Consistently show up to shows early so that you're prepared. Because if you show up on time, sometimes traffic might get you, or now that shows are coming back, I think that's just an important kind of reminder, is consistently check for weather and traffic or any sort of delays or anything like that. So I know those are kind of boring ones, but they are important, and you can definitely lose gigs over there. And then for me, consistently keep stuff in the trunk. So like, I've gone to a jam session before and the bass player was running really late. So they were talking about it, and I overheard them talking about it. And I said, well, I have an amp in the trunk, and I have my bass with me. And they ended up paying me to be the house bass player that night. So it happens rarely, but sometimes being prepared for any situation can put you ahead of the game, and you might actually get a gig out of it. And if you get a gig out of it, you might make a connection that leads to other gigs. So that's just important from like a professional standpoint, of just always being prepared, even when you're just at a jam. So that's kind of a good one. And the other thing is just having some gear in your trunk. I know this is kind of like, this isn't the playing consistency, but it's kind of a good thing. Having some gear that just kind of stays in your car or something, it makes you always prepared for any time people just want to jam. I've also been to someone else's gig where their amp messed up on them, and I was able to save the day by getting my amp out of the trunk and letting them use it for the remainder of the night. And honestly, that even something similar to that even happened with Driving and Crying. So I played a gig with somebody, and we were opening for them just at like a little festival thing where the cities throw a little festival. And so we played our show and got off stage, and then, the bass player couldn't get the really awesome Ampeg head that he had to work, because I guess something was wrong with the tubes. So I had a solid state head and just let him use that, and he just used my rig for that as well. So you're not only being prepared for yourself, but you can be prepared for other people. And other situations like that is silly things, but even in college, they told us to do this. It's like, be prepared for the band. So it's like, if you know that a band will need an extension cable a lot of the times, just keep an extension cable in your trunk. You know, keep a power strip in your trunk. Keep guitar picks in your trunk. You know, keep you could do whatever, and then that way, when it is necessary and somebody like forgot something, and you're like, I got you, they're gonna hire you again because they're like, man, this guy's really prepared. You know, or this girl, whoever was watching, it doesn't matter, guy, girl, whoever. But yeah, it's just like being prepared there kind of makes sense too. Yep. And Seth says, take care of your stuff. It will last you forever almost. And that's true, especially with bass. This is kind of a funny one, but I had a bass teacher that knew the age of the strings of every upright player in town. And so he was telling me, oh yeah, Neil, that guy, his bass strings are 9 years old, and he knew what kind of strings they were too. He's like, he's got the spiral cores and they're 9 years old or whatever. It's like, how do you know this, you know? And it's like, I guess he just goes around and chats people up, and that's just something that bass players commonly talk about, or maybe that he commonly talks about. It's just, hey, what kind of strings do you have on there? Or how long have you had these on there? They sound great, you know, that kind of thing. And he just acquired that information over time, which I thought was pretty nifty. My U-bass strings are all fairly old. You know, I mean, y'all know when I changed the ones the fretless, which, by the way, the neck is still attached. So anybody that had any wagers on that one, it's still good. So far, so good. No cracks. It's been, what, I don't know, several months at this point. But yeah, back to consistency, which I apparently have none of because I'm being all over the place. No, I'm just kidding. This video maybe isn't the best example of consistency, ironically, but we've got all of these different components now. So I'm just gonna recap them real quick, and then I'm gonna open up the chat to if you guys have any questions about the U-bass specifically, or how to stay consistent, or any tips that you have that you want to share with other people about what you do to stay consistent as a bass player. Here's another one I'm going to add before I summarize everything. Basically, just being in shape and having good technique when you practice, not only in what your fingers are doing and how it sounds, but also just in a way that you can keep up with. So repetitive stress is a thing that happens to a lot of musicians, repetitive stress injuries. So you want to make sure that your wrist is fairly straight at a comfortable angle. You don't want it to bend like that. Like this bend will not allow you to play consistent for very long because your hand will start hurting. And if you react to the pain, you'll miss notes and stuff. And then over time, it can be really bad. And then this arm, it's kind of tricky with this one because it's really easy for us to just rest our arm on the side and do that. But once again, you can do that. There's nothing like, there's a lot of professionals that do this. To me, if you're doing that, you're causing your tendons to have to like work through a weird angle. You might be causing some weird friction on stuff in your wrist. So I try, and I don't always succeed, but I try to be consistent about keeping this wrist at a very comfortable angle like the other arm. So it's like if it's a very comfortable angle, then it's not putting all my weight on my arm. But yeah, just kind of keeping that technique consistent too. And that's just kind of another thing. But any technique that you work on, you want to figure out how to get the volume consistent on. It's like if you're doing slap, consistently hitting the string like in the right spot and everything. If you're popping the string at a consistent volume, where it's not so hard that you're going to break a string popping, but it's hard enough to get that attack out. So that's just kind of another thing. I think another way to develop consistency, especially with timing, is with a loop pedal. So if you're sitting here playing, you want to have your timing be very consistent, and you want to click right at the start of it and right at the end of it. So it exposes if you're not in time, right? And then anything that you're looping over it has to be consistently in time. So a loop pedal is a great way to work on timing. So here's an example. Like I'm going to stomp it in time. I'm going to do a snare kind of thing on 2 and 4, and then see if I can build something up from that. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. So now I'm going to try to add something to that. was not very consistent because I was talking. So that's a good example. What's easier is to give yourself 1, 2, 3, 4, but I was trying to see how consistent my timing was there, and I failed. So you got to keep that groove consistent. I'm going to try it a second time and see if I can be a little bit more consistent on it. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. That was better. And then trying to add things. So now I've got something that's kind of keeping an 8th note groove there. I think I was in C. I'm going to do C minor kind of groove. So it helps with like timing consistently, and you can do a lot of things like that. Like the thing that made this challenging to build and why it's not perfect, why it's not perfectly in time, is because I didn't start with a beat 1 being there. So I didn't have a reference on beat 1. I had a reference as beat 2 and beat 4. And I had 2 measures going. So if you're trying to make it easier on yourself, you can give yourself beats 1, 2, 3, and 4 to keep time. But a loop pedal is a great way to work on your timing and get more consistent on that. All right. So notice everybody's being kind of quiet today unless that stopped working. So if you're here, just say something in the chat. Let me know you're enjoying it, and let me know if you have any questions on here. And we'll just keep going a little bit more. And then if you have any questions about the U-bass at this point, go ahead and ask them. But to recap everything that we were talking about, practicing, you want to have a warm-up routine. You probably want to do about 30 minutes of practicing a day. Although if you can do an hour, that's great. If you only have 15 minutes, you can still get better doing that. But I think about 5 to 10 minutes of it, depending on if you're doing 30 minutes or less or an hour, should be warming up. So a 5-minute warm up would be like doing this 1, 2, 4 exercise, right? And just building consistency on that. Consistency of speed, consistency of tempo, and consistency of having the notes be clean. So that's one thing I would do. And then I would probably do some scales, and you can do different scales, different days instead of doing them all on the same day. But I do think that really helps build consistency as well. Then some sort of arpeggio practice would probably be good as well. So you can usually get all those things in about 5 minutes, and just kind of research outside of your practice time which ones you want to do for that week. And then after that, I would say pick songs that have a pattern that's hard to do consistently. So like stuff like Billie Jean is a good place to start, because it's not hard to play, but it's hard to be consistent on, and you got to build up your endurance, and you want to play in a way that you can check your technique as you're going. So the consistency there is the consistency of tempo, of course, the consistency of volume of how hard each finger's hitting. And some people, like I said earlier, like to make that even more consistent by just using one finger. So the idea of the James Jamerson approach, and John Paul Jones did this on songs like Ramble On, you know, where he's using one finger to pluck it. And and that was the James Jamerson thing. I think he got that from him. And the idea there is the attack from that one finger is going to be a lot more consistent than the attack of these two. Like you can hear the difference, because it's not hitting in the same place on the string, because they're just not completely equal, you know, right? They're different size fingers. You have more muscle controlling one of them than the other. You know, there's just all sorts of reasons why it's not exactly even when you play with multiple fingers. So if you want to get a super duper even tone, play with one finger rather than two. But when you do play with two, try to get them as even as possible. So drummers do this a lot too, right? That's why they do a lot of these like slow practice things where they're, they're doing eighth notes, or they're doing like 8 with one hand and then 8 with the other. They're trying to get the volume consistent, the attack consistent, and they're also trying to get their muscles to be even on both hands to do that. So it's kind of the same thing. We want to practice alternating our fingers so that both the index and the middle finger, at the very least, just have the same kind of attack when they hit the strings. Awesome. So then outside of playing, so you've got a consistent practice routine. I think doing 30 minutes a day is great. If you can only do 15, that's okay. But if you do 30 minutes every day, I think that would benefit you more than doing it all on 2 days a week. So consistency, just spreading that out through the week. Like I said, consistency of tone, consistency of right hand and left hand. Another thing that's kind of overlooked is just posture. You want your posture to be very consistent. So not only in the arms and, not bending your wrists and stuff, but also just sitting up straight. Because if you have back pain, it can actually get in the way you're playing. Like let's say you're on stage and you're playing, and for me, this happens a lot. I get a pinched nerve, and I think it's from, just the weight of the bass with the strap. But it could also be from hunching over and just having bad posture. So it's kind of like anything that can lessen pain will make you more consistent when you're playing a show, especially if it's a long show. Like some of these weddings, we end up playing for 3 to 4 hours just between all the different parts. The actual playing time, sometimes ends up being 3 hours. So, and then there are bar gigs I've played where we've played for 4 hours straight. And honestly, I just don't recommend those. I think playing for 4 hours straight is just a bad idea anytime. That's another thing. Consistently take breaks, but there are some things. You might play with a person that basically booked the gig because they were going to keep a steady flow of music through the whole night, basically no breaks for 4 hours. If you didn't avoid those gigs, then consistency of technique, consistency of posture, and just doing everything that you can to make things easier is important. That being said, the endurance sometimes will cause too much repetition. So if you find yourself playing a lot of songs, like for instance, octaves, like if you're playing a bunch of octaves, that can kind of wear you out a little bit, right? Doesn't seem like it at first, but try doing it for like 2 or 3 songs in a row or 10 minutes in a row. It could just be one long song where they're just keeping everybody on the dance floor, and you're sitting there going like the whole time. I don't know, some sort of disco thing. Well, in that case, it may actually, even though it's not quite as consistent, if you're doing this night after night after night, it may be better for you to practice being able to switch it up, but keep the sound consistent. So right here, I'm doing index to ring and then middle to pinky to play the same notes. Index to ring finger, middle to pinky. And you don't want to do it like back and forth like that. But I do think that if you're playing something over and over again and your hand starts to wear out, then making the repetition on different fingers will allow a more even wear. So if you're just playing for, like I said, hours in the same night, you may want to look for things like that just to make it a little bit easier and keep your hands from locking up. And I've noticed the same thing, which ironically, after telling you all the good technique stuff, sometimes even when you're doing good technique, your hands still get tired in this position, and it's still good to change it up, even if it's technically bad technique, for a song or two. Just changing up the way you're playing, whether you're playing with 2 fingers or if you're playing with your thumb or what it happens to be, just being able to change it up throughout a long night will actually keep you consistent endurance-wise in the long term. So you're sacrificing short-term consistency on one song maybe to be able to play longer and have the endurance. But those are small things, and they're also just kind of suggestions for if you have repetitive stress injuries or anything. Awesome. And so we got another person stop by. Hey, Xandra, how's it going? Xandra. And then Seth says, my dad would always have a squeeze ball handy, build those hand muscles. Yeah, so that's important, building the hand muscles. I talked to a lot of upright players, and they all agree. I didn't know this was going to end up being like a fitness lesson, but but building up back muscles is really important when you play the upright. And I think it's important with electric too, because if you're playing with a strap over your shoulder, it's kind of pulling down on your back. So if you exercise your back muscles, they kind of pull back naturally if you exercise them regularly. So then that way it's not everything pulling forward like this the whole time. And just the fact that you're going to have something resting on it for several hours, on a show day or something, it's just kind of good to do that. Another consistent thing to think about is the height of the bass, right? If you're playing on different basses and like one's really low down, or you like having the strap low on one gig and high on another gig, that inconsistency might mess up your hands just doing something that you're not used to, because it might use different muscle groups and all that. On upright bass, it's way, way, way important to have that consistency, to make sure that you're pulling with your arm into the neck for each note rather than using your fingers to squeeze each one. That goes back to what Seth is saying. Yes, you do want to be able to have that strength in your hand, but you also don't want to have to rely on it as much. And then, Seth's saying, you want to try to avoid messing up your back playing bass. Bowing is pretty awful on the back too. Not gonna lie. So it's just a lot of technique things that you really got to watch out for. And if you did get injured from playing upright, that's a good thing about the U-bass. You can still play bass, I know a lot of people that have carpal tunnel and that have just other wrist issues and things. And if they played a full-size bass, it would probably wear them out a lot quicker. So they get to play longer, and, more playing equals more fun. So the polyurethane strings really help with that. But yeah, there's just a whole bunch of little tricks that you can do to not wear yourself out, basically. And that's part of being consistent because of the endurance aspect of things. So it's being consistent through a whole show, whereas individual songs, you might notice, like a lot of times with Billie Jean, I've actually used that as an exercise. And I say it was an exercise, but honestly, it was just a survival technique, because I was playing that with a band, and several nights, and we would end up playing it for way longer than the song is, to keep people dancing on the dance floor. The singer would do a shtick where he would go out and dance with audience members, and sometimes the guitar player would do that too. And so I'm sitting there holding the groove down for 10 minutes or something on Billie Jean. And so you create things like that to kind of get yourself through it. It would be hard, I'm gonna be honest, to do the line with the octave on there. The hardest thing about this is playing this consistently and keeping the tone consistent with everything else. Because if you're plucking with your thumb and your finger, that's going to be a different attack than if you're playing into the string like this. And even if you do two fingers at the same time, it's hard to have a consistent attack on hitting two notes at the same time as when you're playing the other notes. So that one's kind of hard to do consistently, and that's why I generally just do the octaves at the beginning and then drop it as I go through, meaning just do the single notes as I go through. Because there have been times where I've tried to play the octaves all the way through, and it's literally hurt my hands so bad that it made the next several songs hard to play and painful to play. So just do what you need to do to get through the gigs. If you're playing a long show, if you're practicing and you like practicing for more than an hour a day, I would recommend not doing it back to back. So like if you generally I would say play for 30 minutes, take a break, and at least a 15-minute break, stretch your hands out. That's another thing to do consistently stretch. Because if you're just playing a whole bunch and you're doing a whole bunch of exercise, but you're not stretching everything out, then sometimes, your muscles will get so tight that you won't be able to control your fingers as well and can't be consistent when that's happening. So just another thing to keep in mind. Very cool. Very cool. So does anybody have any questions, just general questions about the U-bass, or general questions about technique, playing consistently, or any of those kinds of things? Let me know. Now is a good time. And and I'll play a song. Hopefully it'll sound consistent with everything that I'm saying here. I'll just play something with the loop pedal while I wait to see if you guys have any questions. Let's see, what's a good one that has like a repetitive thing? That was not consistent, right? I just played in a different key after playing for like a couple minutes. So there are a lot of things to think about with consistency there. So just as an example there, I was trying to start with a groove where I was having to keep the index middle thing going steady. And then after that, the timing, keeping the timing consistent. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. And then once I got into soloing over it, I kind of chordal thing over it the next time around. And then after that, I turned the looper to where it wasn't recording anymore. And then I was just kind of soloing in really the B blues scale. So either in the low octave there or all on one string over here. Right? But then occasionally I was throwing in a note from the Dorian mode. So that note's not in the blues scale, but I always like combining the blues scale with the Dorian mode. I did that in my song Transitions, and I just like soloing with that kind of combined scale going on there. So, but that's the thing. It's like I stayed consistent, and then I looked away, and my finger apparently slid up a fret while I was looking away, and so I started playing in C instead of B, and it sounded really awful. So just another example of like things to be consistent on, right? Consistently pay attention to what you're doing, thinking about what scale you're in, or kind of playing enough to where you're not having to think that hard about it, but your fingers kind of just know what to do. In order to do that, you have to build up muscle memory on the neck, and just the idea of how you play in different keys. You're also consistently using theory a little bit, like knowing you're a whole step or a half step away from certain notes that work with the groove and that work in the key. So when you're improvising, there's a little bit of consistency you have to think of there. Then you have to think about rhythm. You have to do things that still make sense with the parts that are going on. But the big thing as a bass player, though, is we're not going to be improvising that much unless we're playing jazz. So I guess I should give you like a jazz example. But But basically, walking lines are kind of hard to be consistent on. So you'd think that quarter notes are really easy, but the problem with playing quarter notes for an entire song is that you don't get a break. So every other song, there's like breaks in the phrasing where you get to kind of like take a break, not every other song, but you know what I mean? Like, cause like Billie Jean, you're doing this the whole time until you get to the people always told me, be careful what until you get to that part. And once you get to that part, you get a break from it. But some of these jazz songs, you're literally walking the whole time, and it's kind of an endurance test for sure. And some of the jams that I've been to, honestly, I just didn't have the endurance on upright to do at the tempo that they had, because you got to play really fast on some of them. They count out a song 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. You got to be able to improvise on the spot or have a memorized line that you can play. But then you got to keep that going for like 3 to 5 minutes while everybody jams. And that is exhausting. And that's why you got to be in good shape. Your technique has to be really rock solid, because if you are playing kind of in a weird way, especially on upright bass, you can just injure yourself really easily. You have to practice consistently, especially with things like upright, so that you maintain calluses on your fingers. So that's not as important on U-bass, because you're probably not going to get blisters from polyurethane strings. But if you're playing on metal strings and you're playing a lot of notes, or playing something where you're having to be, consistently playing quarter notes at a fast tempo or whatnot. Yeah. Oh, and Seth says 5 minutes, try it for 20 minutes. No, it's true. You're doing it at a super burning tempo. Most of the time they don't do the songs for quite 20 minutes, but there are people and situations where you had to. And that's why I think being a professional upright player is more like partially you're an athlete, and it's the same thing with the drummer. It's like drummers and upright players, they have to be more like an athlete, whereas some of the horn players, they're playing crazy stuff and doing all this craziness and everything, but then they get to take a break when it's the next horn player's turn. So it's just a different kind of challenge with each instrument. But for me, that's the big one with upright. Yeah, and I was saying 20 minutes on the same song at a burning tempo. When I did the show with the band that was doing all the Glenn Miller stuff, and I was traveling with them, it was never 20 minutes of staying at the same tempo, but there were segments of things that were 5 minutes that were pretty fast tempo, and it was you got to be in shape to keep up with it. And I got to be honest, I think there are other bass players that were better at that consistency on the upright to do that. But really, for somebody that's not trained to do that, there's kind of a sport quality to it, right? Because if you play upright bass and you're just like, oh, I kind of get how to walk on electric, I'll be fine on there, and I'll play. About 3 minutes in, you're gonna have blisters on your hands from the amount of attack that you have to put into the strings to play if you haven't practiced playing upright. So it's just an endurance thing. In order to be consistent, you have to practice consistently, which has been an issue for me on some of these gigs. I'll get an upright gig and it'll be, like I haven't played with the fingers on upright. Maybe I had a bow gig or something, but I haven't played with the fingers on upright in a long time. Well, then I won't think about it and I'll play at the normal force that I'd expect to be fine. And there have been times where it's like I did that and 2 songs in, I have blisters and I have to, pop them or play through them painfully or use a third finger, and you end up with blisters on all 3 fingers, after you've exhausted these 2, you're just kind of working through your hand. So with upright, sure, there's a need for being consistently working out. It's a lot. But on the U bass, the main things to be consistent about are your right hand, because there's a lot of string noise. So to lessen string noise, you really have to be careful about how you're playing with your right hand. Carefully even on how you're muting the strings, because sometimes when I mute the strings and I have my hand leaning against it, if it moves around too much while I'm playing the other strings, you'll hear it, right? Because of the piezo pickup. You wouldn't really hear that on an electric bass, but with the way the pickup is on a U bass, you do hear it. So on a full scale electric, it's not quite as bad. But there's just a lot of little things like that. So consistency with the left hand, consistency with the right hand. With the left hand, like I said, if you're playing with metal strings, I think it's important for you to be closer to the fret rather than in the middle of the, so when you're playing like the second fret, notice how my finger's in between the two pieces of metal. So on the polyurethane strings, I think it's better if you're right in the middle. But on metal strings, if you don't want to have to push down quite as hard, you want to be a little bit closer to the piece of metal that's closer to the body within the square, so that way you don't have to push down quite as hard. And then you got to get a consistent stretch with your fingers so that they're not all like super close together all the time, because then you'll have to shift to play all those things. So for me, my hand just kind of sits, it kind of adjusts to what I'm playing. So if I'm playing higher up, it gets closer together. If I'm playing on electric bass, it knows how much to space out. Or I know to do upright technique. If I know that the spacing is too far, then I'll play like pointer finger will play the first fret, and then instead of my ring finger playing the third fret, I'll play it with the pinky. If it's on an instrument where the stretch is bigger. So a whole lot of little things to think about there. Once again, I'm going to check the chat and see how everything's going. Henry says, did you study music? And the answer is yes, I did. I went to Georgia State for, I think I was there for 3 years. So I didn't get the degree, but I went through most of the theory classes there and did the other thing. Just don't do the pinky out thing. The pinky out like that. What am I, like sipping tea or something? I don't know. Like to the queen, right? Nope. But I'm not sure if that's where you're going with that, Seth. But anyway, so Henry says, did you study music? And the answer is yes, at Georgia State. I also took some private lessons growing up. And then at Georgia State, we had to, State University in Atlanta, we had to play piano as well. And so we learned a lot of theory. There were several theory classes. And then in high school, I also went to, had a music theory class. They had AP music theory. And so I took that as well. That's where I got introduced to being able to play things by ear. Before that, I could pick things out by ear. Like if I listened to the radio and I noodled around a bit on the bass, I'd figure out songs. But it's just like it never occurred to me that using intervals and comparing songs that you hear, to the intervals that within scales or familiar songs, that you could actually use that to pick out and get everything right once you knew what the first note was. So it's like if somebody gives you the starting pitch and they say, this song's in the key of C, and then they play the song, and it's a short little melody. I mean, my memory is not good enough to remember like really long melodies or anything. But then you could just think about it and go, okay, I remember the rhythm, and now I've got the notes. It's like dun dun. Okay, well that sounded like Happy Birthday, so that's a major second, right? And then so let's say it was like dun 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 dun. You go, okay, well, that's the root going to the fifth. I heard a fifth. From there, dun dun. It's a descending minor third, that kind of stuff. So I learned that in AP music theory. And I remember when I first learned it, I thought it was like, that scene in The Matrix where he starts seeing everything in binary and it's just like ones and zeros and stuff. That's kind of how it felt when I realized you could do this and started being able to do it. It was like, whoa, it's like I'm in The Matrix. The only problem is it does kind of take the magic out of things, right? Because then you start hearing things in numbers and intervals. But yeah, that's a really long way of saying, yes, I did study music theory, and I still nerd out on, music theory videos. So sometimes I'll watch Adam Neely. If you like his channel, he's got a lot of really good theory videos. My friend Bill Graham that played piano on my album, he's got a lot of interesting things with chord voicings and stuff. And I learned a lot from his playing as well. He's just very, very good. He also went to Georgia State. And just really anyone I come across, if I don't understand something, I just kind of learn a little bit more. Yeah, so Adam Neely, Rick Beato, he kind of keeps on the simpler side of theory because he's kind of figured out that he can reach more people. So Rick has some good videos, but honestly, I like the videos where he breaks down the songs and shows you what each individual part is doing, because he's got the master tracks to be able to take out and isolate each instrument. That's the stuff that's the most interesting to me with him. But there's a lot of good theory resources online. You just kind of got to know what to look up. And, for that reason, it might still be better to get a course from somebody. I also have like a free playlist on the YouTube channel if you're just wanting like, it's not a theory playlist, but there's theory within it applied to bass, if that makes sense. But yeah, does anybody else have any questions? Or they can be just general U-bass questions or just anything else. Just let me know. I guess I have a question. If I don't hear you guys asking questions, Seth, how is the upright stuff going on? What's going on with that these days? I know he's been trying to get an upright bass for a while, which is probably part of the reason I keep bringing up the upright bass, even though we've been talking about U-bass. So yeah, just let me know about that. Okay, I'm saving mine for the comments to this video. Okay, cool. Okay, well, I'll let you do that in the comments once we get through the chat, because I know the live chat part generally disappears. Cool. So yeah, I guess I'll wait for the comments if you want to do that in the comments instead. But does anybody else have any questions for the stream? I know there's only a few people watching. If not, then you kind of got the idea on how to be consistent, right? So scales, knowing a little bit of theory. I do think knowing a basic level of theory helps you be consistent on learning new songs quicker, being able to get to the point where you can play through them. Staying in shape, which is part of the reason of warm-ups, and setting aside a little bit of the day doing that. Other warm-ups, when you're doing 1, 2, 3, 4 in a row, that's not enough to keep you super consistent. You can do the permutations where you skip and kind of scramble them, and then do the consistent scrambled pattern on all the strings, so that you're practicing going from your pointer finger to your ring finger rather than just always going in this same order. That kind of helps. And then you can do some string skipping kinds of things. There are lots of books that just have all this stuff in them. I'm trying to remember, there's every kind of book. I'm sure the Hal Leonard stuff has some things, but there was one book that someone had that just literally listed out all the permutations. I think Ariane Kapp has a bass book that has a lot of different things listed, but there's just some other books that have some really good things like that. So there's all sorts of things like that. All right. Well, guys, that's really it for today. Once again, just kind of play consistently, be consistent. There's a lot of levels to it. Physical level, for endurance. And then just technique-wise, if you're getting a lot of fret buzz, the way to get more consistent on that is to really pay attention to where your fingers are. On the right hand, just making sure you're alternating correctly, making sure you're not hitting extra strings with your fingernails, just all sorts of little things like that. And then being consistent as a professional, being on time or early to gigs, having stuff prepared for you, but also for other people in the band, like just extra things. That kind of consistency can really pay off as well. Playing gigs, just being able to sound consistent even when you're using different fingers, so that if you're doing a really repetitious song that you're playing for a really long time, you can change it up so that you don't get a repetitive stress injury. And then consistency of gear, just making sure everything works and that you have a backup for when things go wrong. All right, guys, that about does it for today. So thank you once again for tuning in, and I will see you guys next week, next Tuesday for another video, and next Thursday for the live stream. Have a good one. Yes, just making sure all you're just consistent too, and yeah, tuning is important as well, and staying in the right key for the song is also important. All right, guys. On that note, I'll see you guys later on.